All right, Alec, I think that means that it's our time to move on to you for Penn State. And to start this off, I'll go ahead and just start off with Jackson's comment. I've got a feeling Penn State has a good chance of making the 12-team playoff in 2024. Now, you don't have to address that first, but just give us the whole idea of the offseason, what's been going on, and maybe finish it up with, is your expectation, are Penn State fans' expectations this year to make the 12-team playoff?
Yeah, so start off by James Franklin had to replace all three coordinators if you count special teams as a coordinator, which it kind of is. Which the last time he had to replace the defense and the offensive coordinator at the same time was 2015, the end of the 2015 season, and then 2016 was the only time they won the Big Ten under Franklin. So maybe that's a sign of things to come. But you get Andy Kotelnicki at offensive coordinator, which I think a lot of people like that hire. His system is apparently a lot simpler than what Mike Yurcich's was, and it seemed like Drew Allar did struggle with communication and seeing where receivers were going to be, especially in games like against good defenses like Ohio State, Michigan, and even the likes of Illinois at times. So I think the offensive hire is very good. I think most people tell you they would have preferred to hold on to Manny Diaz. I think some people were a little underwhelmed that he took the Duke job. I think people thought maybe he'd leave for a better job. And from some of the things I heard, Penn State made a very competitive offer to him that was maybe not all the way up there with what Duke offered, but close enough where you could say just run it back for one more year and maybe a better job comes along next year. But that was not the case. So he sticks with getting another head coach that, in a sense, was a little disgraced on their way out with getting Tom Allen from Indiana. A guy that developed linebackers at a decent rate at Indiana. So he gets to come to Penn State where recruiting linebackers is pretty easy. There's a lot of tradition with linebackers. So I don't think that's a bad hire. I don't think it's Manny Diaz and that level of aggression that he brought with the amount of sacks and turnovers they produced the last couple of seasons. But it's not bad at all. I think there's a lot of continuity with the rest of the staff. Every position coach came back, which is big, especially for the receivers, because that room needed kind of an overhaul. And you get Julian Fleming. I know JR and I were talking about this before the show, just kind of what Julian Fleming brings to this team. Maybe not so much as a pass catcher, but just being a leader in that room. It's a relatively inexperienced room that lost its leader in Parker Washington after the 2022 season. And it showed last season on the field. There was a lot of mistakes, a lot of guys not knowing the playbook. Lose your top three corners, and then they brought in I don't know if he still is, because I know when Washington and Alabama guys entered the portal, that changed. But A.J. Harris at one point was the number one corner in the portal. They bring him in from Georgia, which was a big get to replace King and Johnny Dixon. So I thought they did well. They brought back Nolan Rucci, who is a legacy recruit who they lost to Wisconsin back in the 21 cycle. They get him back. He's going to battle for the right tackle spot. So they didn't do a lot in the portal. I thought they did enough to fill in spots that definitely needed someone, which was nice. Drew Allar's back, Nick Silton's back, Katron Allen's back, Abdul Carter's back. And the big thing was they got 3 draft-eligible defensive tackles to come back for a 6th season, which I think is really big because that group struggled in 2022. If you watch the Michigan game, they were a lot better, I think, this past season. So just having that continuity with that group, too, is really going to help this season. So overall, I think it's kind of a B plus offseason. I think keeping Manny Diaz would have raised it to an A. And I think they probably still need another wide receiver transfer. So maybe that comes in the spring. But so far, it's been, I think, a solid offseason. There hasn't been any issues or anything like that. So it's kind of been a little quiet, but I think they've gotten a lot done that puts them in position to at least compete for some of those bottom half 12-team playoff spots next year.
So would you say that's the expectation then, is they need to get to the playoffs or just contend for it?
I think a lot of people would say they have to get in with it being 12. Now, I know it's really 11 because one goes to a G5 school, but they would have been in last year. I don't think anyone's expecting them to get the top 4 bye. I'm not even sure anyone's really thinking about a home game. I think being somewhere between like in the 9 to 11 range, a lot of people would be happy with that. So I think that's what the expectation is. I think the schedule sets up for 10-2, 9-3. I don't know if 9-3 does it. I think 10-2 might. So I think, there's a good chance they're 10 or 11 with 10-2. So I think that's what a lot of people are looking at.
That's interesting. I was just on Jackson's show earlier, and Jackson just made another comment here. 10-12 at USC, 10-26 at Wisconsin. Man, this kind of brutal stretch down at the end versus Ohio State, 11-9, and then Washington will be a very telling stretch for Penn State. Yeah, no. And the thing I told Jackson is I think in the Big Ten nowadays, if you have 3 losses, I think you're in. Because I don't think they're putting 2 Big 12 teams in. And I still think a 3-loss Big Ten team is more impressive than, a 2-loss ACC team that, finishes second in the ACC most times. Now if it's Clemson or something like that, they might, give the nod to them. But I could see Penn State making it in with 3 losses, possibly even 4. I don't think that's likely, but possibly even 4. So Spartan Dog, do you have any questions for Alec about the offseason?
Yeah, Alec, I'm very interested to hear your perspective on the Tom Allen hire. I do think that, Manny Diaz probably would have benefited from staying another year and seeing what kind of jobs opened up besides Duke. I think it was pretty obvious he was itching to get back into the head coaching job. I know, based on what you hear and what he desperately wanted an interview for MSU. So, for Tom Allen, what are your expectations for him as a coordinator, given that he spent, the last almost decade now as a head coach?
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of be somewhere around maybe more Brett Pry than Manny Diaz. I don't know if you're ever going to get Manny Diaz level defensive coordinator again, but, Brett Pry was a very consistent coordinator here for over half a decade. So, I think that's what you're looking for. I don't think the numbers are going to be as gaudy where they were top in the nation in sacks and top 5 in turnovers. But I think they're going to still play solid defense. He was a pretty decent developer. I know the last few years at Indiana kind of went downhill, but the first few they were not bad defensively. And obviously there's going to be more talent to work with at Penn State than at Indiana. So I expect them to still be a top 15 type defense, but I think a lot of that will be more based on yards and points, which, they still were with Diaz. But I think some of the chaos stats, as Diaz called them, they might drop a little bit. But I will say, I think Franklin likes Tom Allen because this might be a guy who, with the way things ended at Indiana, maybe he's not interested in running to be a head coach right away again. So maybe it's a guy he gets for a few years. And I think that did kind of factor in his decision to go with Tom Allen, is that he wants some stability with his coordinators. And I think bringing in a guy who maybe isn't in a rush to get back to being a head coach played in there significantly.
Yeah, I was saying for a long time, all last season, I kept saying Tom Allen's going to get fired. It is the way it is. But Tom Allen is going to make a team very happy as a defensive coordinator. I agree. He's probably not Manny Diaz level, but somebody who can provide consistent defense that does a good job, kind of like a Brent Pry. I think that was a good way to put it. So, Alec, my question for you. So, I think Penn State fans were happy with Drew Allar last year, but people were kind of giving him a lot of crap with not being able to throw the ball downfield and some of that stuff. Where does the fan base right now sit on Drew Allar? And kind of side question to that, is his starting job 100% safe with a new coordinator coming in?
So I'd say the fan base might be a little lukewarm. I think a decent amount of people, including myself, want to give him a pass for the fact that Yurcich ran a complicated system that he clearly didn't get the way Sean Clifford got, and he's a lot younger than Sean Clifford, so I can understand that a little bit. And the second part is the receivers this year were not good. I mean, I was at the Penn State Ohio State game, and I felt like McCord and Allar were both struggling, but the difference was when McCord was struggling, he had, a top 3 pick in the draft to throw to that was his go-to guy, his security blanket, and Allar just didn't have that. And I felt like it did hurt him. He was inaccurate at times. Whenever Penn State plays Ohio State, JTT just turns in like a top 3 pick too. So I think that's another thing. Like he got into him a little bit, but he also struggled with Michigan. I know Michigan had a really good defense, but he even had problems, with like every road game. Like Illinois was pulling teeth for a little bit, and then he looked really good at Maryland, but Maryland defense wasn't that great. So I just it's hard to tell because there were games like West Virginia, Maryland, where you're like, oh man, like this guy could be a first round pick. And then you watch him against Ohio State and Michigan, and it's like, are we sure this is the right guy? And it's hard to tell until we see him go against a Wisconsin at Wisconsin or, against Ohio State this year. I don't think we're going to fully grasp if he has improved or not. But I will say, Beau Pribula, the backup, maybe has a chance to do some things here because at Kansas, Kotelnicki, his quarterbacks ran, and they ran at Buffalo too. I think I was looking, I think his quarterbacks averaged like 500, 600 rushing yards a year when all the places he's been in OC. So Allar doesn't run. And the one time he did run against Michigan, he fumbled and it kind of screwed that game. So it's not in his strong suit. It definitely is Pribula's strong suit, but I don't know if they like Pribula's arm enough right now to make him a full-time quarterback. So I think he will have an increased role, but most of it will be, trick play packages, wildcat, that kind of stuff. But I do think Pribula will see the field more, but I just don't think full-time.
Well, and you saw that stuff at Kansas. I mean, it was not uncommon to see Jaden Daniels, I can't remember, and him and Jason Bean to be on the field together, which was crazy sometimes. But they were both good enough athletes that it also wasn't crazy because you're like, well, both these guys could touch the ball and be electric with it. So, I'm really, really interested to see what the Kansas offensive coordinator does at Penn State this year, because I really did like his offenses at Kansas, and I think that he could bring a neat little wrinkle to the Big Ten offenses that would make it hard to stop. So, Spartan Dog, you got any more questions before we move on from this?
Yeah, I just have one more question.
Go ahead.
I did notice, Alec, while I was kind of looking over Penn State's recruiting classes, is that it seems like transfers for James Franklin are a little bit lower on the priority list than recruiting out of high school. I just want to kind of get your feelings on that because, obviously, like, both out of necessity and just like preference of coaching staffs here at Michigan State, we've really embraced the transfer portal and kind of used it in a variety of ways. I'm just kind of curious how you feel James Franklin is using the portal.
Yeah, I think he would prefer to just recruit his guys, build relationships with high schools, and keep bringing in highly rated guys from regional high schools like the McDonough School in Maryland. They do a really good job there. I think that's what his preference would be, but I just think in the age of college football, it's not what you can do by itself anymore. And he's mentioned that. He mentioned it today. Actually, he had a media availability. He mentioned like in this age, you have to embrace the transfer portal. The thing is, Penn State is not crazy in the NIL where they can kind of get in these bidding wars with some of these other schools. So I think he's very selective about who they bring in, and they have to make sure, one, it's at a position of need, and two, it's a good fit. And I mean, so far he's done pretty good hitting on the guys they brought in the portal. I mean, they brought in Arnold Ebiketie to play defensive end a couple years ago. He ended up being an early second-round pick. They brought in Chop Robinson. He might go at the end of the first round this year. He's brought in Jordan Stout, a kicker, and the guy's a starter for the Ravens. And like, I don't know, when he does go there, it seems to work. But I think he likes to build up his culture, bring these guys in from day one, installing them, what the program believes, what he wants out of them, and he'd like to shy away from bringing in too many transfers and maybe turning off guys that he promised, you're my guy when I was in your living room recruiting you out of high school. I think he feels like he still owes some loyalty to them, but when it's necessary for him to bring in someone, when it helps the team get better and compete, he's going to, but I don't think it's their number one priority.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, Alec, thank you for talking about the offseason there. Thanks for listening. to the Big Ten Huddle. Please do like and subscribe. We appreciate that. If this was your first time listening, we are the Big Ten Huddle. We cover all things Big Ten football and basketball. We have a long episode every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, all at 9 o'clock. So come in, check us out, get in the chat, let us know what you're thinking. We would love to have you join us and learn more about the Big Ten.